close to something meaningful by adult standards, but to you it carried a strange weight. Maybe it was a slightly crumpled note handed to you by a relative, or coins pressed into your palm with a quiet, "Save it." You didn't spend it immediately. You held it, looked at it, folded it carefully, as if it might disappear if you weren't careful enough. You noticed how your parents reacted to money, how they paused before spending, how they counted, how they stretched things just a little further than they should have. You didn't understand numbers back then, but you understood tension. You understood hesitation. You understood that money didn't belong to you. It passed through you, controlled by something bigger, something external. Even when you had it, it didn't feel like yours to use freely. It felt temporary, conditional, and without realizing it, you learned your first lesson. Money comes with limits, and your job is to respect them. You didn't question it. You accepted it quietly, the way children accept gravity. You didn't know it then, but that feeling would follow you for years. As you grew older, no one sat you down and explained money in a structured way, but somehow the rules became clear anyway. Money came from work, but not just any work, the right kind of work, stable work, predictable work, the kind that arrives on a fixed date inside an envelope or a bank notification controlled by someone else. It wasn't framed as limitation, it was framed as security. Study hard, get a good job, and life will take care of itself. That sentence was repeated enough times that it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a law. You followed it naturally. School wasn't just about learning, it was positioning. Every exam, every grade, every decision quietly pointed you toward one outcome: earning permission to earn. You didn't question why money had to come from somewhere outside of you. It simply did. Your role wasn't to create it, but to qualify for it, to be chosen by it, and the system rewarded that belief just enough to keep it alive. You saw people around you living this way, surviving this way, managing this way. It worked, at least on the surface. Bills got paid, routines stayed intact, life remained stable. And stability has a way of convincing you that nothing needs to change. But there was a hidden trade buried inside that stability. You weren't just earning money, you were giving up control over how it was earned, when it arrived, and how far it could grow. You didn't notice the trade at first because it felt normal. Everyone around you had made it too, and without realizing it, you gave up control before you ever had it. The moment doesn't arrive dramatically. It slips into your life quietly, almost accidentally. You're scrolling, watching something, maybe just passing time the way everyone does, and then you see it. Someone talking about money in a way that doesn't match your reality. They're not describing a job. They're not talking about salaries or waiting for the end of the month. They're talking about creating income directly. At first, it feels distant, almost fictional, like something designed to impress, not something meant to be believed. You instinctively look for flaws in the idea. This has to be exaggerated. There's something they're not telling. Because if it's real, then it contradicts everything you've quietly accepted your entire life. But the strange part is, they don't seem extraordinary. They don't look like they come from a different world. In fact, some of them look uncomfortably similar to you. Same starting point, same access, same time. And that's where the discomfort begins. Because if they can do it, then the system you trusted might not be the only system that exists. And if there's another way, then what you've been following isn't wrong, but it might be incomplete. You sit with that thought longer than you expected to. You replay it, question it, try to dismiss it, but it doesn't leave. It stays in the background, quietly reshaping how you look at everything, your job, your time, your potential. Either this is fake or you've been living wrong, and that thought doesn't leave you alone anymore. At first, nothing in your life changes on the surface, and that's exactly what makes this phase so dangerous. You're still the same person to everyone around you, same routine, same job, same conversations, but internally, something has shifted in a way you can't reverse. What started as a simple moment of curiosity has now turned into a quiet pattern. You find yourself staying up a little longer than usual, not out of habit, but because your mind refuses to let go of the question that has started to take shape. You begin consuming information in a different way. Videos are no longer entertainment, they are clues. Conversations become observations. Every successful person you come across starts to feel like a case study rather than a coincidence. You don't fully understand what you're learning yet, but you feel it. There's a growing awareness that the way money works might be more flexible than you were taught, and that realization doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels destabilizing, because if money can be created differently, then everything you've built your life around suddenly feels incomplete. The structure that once felt safe now feels narrow. The routine that once felt responsible now feels repetitive. You begin to notice how time is exchanged, how effort is measured, and how outcomes are limited, and once you notice those patterns, they don't disappear. The most interesting part is that you don't share any of this with anyone, not because you're hiding something intentionally, but because you don't have anything solid to present yet. You're still figuring it out, still connecting pieces that don't fully make sense, and until you have something real, something tangible, it feels safer to keep it internal. So you continue quietly, building this invisible layer of understanding on top of your normal life. You show up where you're expected to show up, you respond when you're spoken to, but part of your mind is somewhere else entirely, trying to make sense of a world that operates by different rules. And the deeper you go into that world, the more uncomfortable your current life becomes, not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer enough. You start to realize that curiosity isn't just a phase, it's a doorway, and once you've stepped close enough to see what's on the other side, going back to not knowing doesn't feel like an option anymore. The more you learn, the more your reality starts to shift, and slowly, almost quietly, your old life begins to feel like something you've outgrown, even though you're still living in it. And the more you learn, the less your current life makes sense. At some point, curiosity alone stops satisfying you, and that's when you decide to try something for yourself. It's not a bold, confident decision. It's a quiet one, almost hesitant, like testing water with your foot before stepping in. You don't announce it, you don't tell anyone what you're doing, and you definitely don't frame it as a new journey. It's too early for that. Instead, you start in silence, choosing something that feels possible enough to attempt, but uncertain enough to hide. You begin working on it in the margins of your life, in the hours no one pays attention to, late at night, early in the morning, or in between moments that used to be empty. It could be freelancing, trading, content creation, or something else entirely. But what matters isn't the method, it's the shift. For the first time, you're not just consuming ideas about money, you're trying to participate in them. And that changes how everything feels. There's a tension that comes with this phase that you didn't expect. It's not excitement, at least not the kind you imagined. It's a mix of anticipation and pressure, because now there's something at stake. Even if no one else knows about it, you do. Every small decision carries weight. Every action feels like it could either move you forward or confirm your doubts, and that awareness makes the process feel heavier than it should. At the same time, you're still living your regular life, which creates a strange duality. On one side, you're the person everyone recognizes, reliable, predictable, stable. On the other side, you're experimenting with something uncertain, something that doesn't have guaranteed outcomes or clear rules. And maintaining both versions of yourself requires energy. You start to feel the strain of switching between them, pretending to be fully present in one world while quietly building something in another. There's also the constant awareness that this might not work. That thought doesn't always come in loudly, but it's there, sitting in the background, reminding you that you're stepping into unfamiliar territory. And because you haven't told anyone, there's no external pressure. But there's internal pressure instead, the kind that comes from knowing that this is your decision, your risk, your responsibility. Trying in silence feels safe at first, but over time, it becomes its own kind of weight. Because when no one knows what you're building, no one understands what you're carrying, and that makes every small failure feel bigger, every delay feel longer, and every doubt feel more personal. What started as curiosity has now become something real, something fragile, something that could either open a new path or quietly collapse without anyone ever knowing it existed. But trying in silence comes with its own pressure. Then comes the phase no one really talks about, the one that doesn't look inspiring when you're in it and doesn't sound impressive when you explain it later. This is where things stop feeling exciting and start feeling confusing. The ideas that once seemed clear begin to fall apart when you try to apply them. The strategies that looked simple from the outside become complicated in practice, and the results you expected don't show up the way you thought they would. You put in time, effort, and focus, but nothing seems to connect. You try different approaches, adjust your methods, follow advice, and still, the outcome remains inconsistent or completely absent. It's not just that things aren't working, it's that you don't fully understand why they aren't working. And that lack of clarity is what makes this phase so frustrating. Because when you don't know what's wrong, you don't know how to fix it. At first, you stay patient. You remind yourself that learning takes time and that everyone struggles in the beginning. But as the days turn into weeks and the weeks start stretching longer, that patience begins to wear thin. You start questioning your approach, then your decisions, and eventually, without realizing it, you begin questioning yourself. There's a quiet shift that happens during this phase. The problem stops being external and starts feeling internal. Instead of thinking, this strategy isn't working, you start thinking, maybe I'm not good at this. That thought doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, reinforced by every failed attempt and every confusing outcome. And because you're doing this alone without feedback or guidance, those thoughts don't get challenged. They just sit there, growing stronger. You begin to compare yourself to others, even if you try not to. You see people who seem to understand things faster, who appear to be making progress while you feel stuck, and that comparison creates a quiet sense of inadequacy. It doesn't matter that you're at the beginning and they might be further ahead. What matters is how it feels in the moment. And in that moment, it feels like you're falling behind in something you don't fully understand. What makes this even harder is that your external life hasn't changed. To everyone else, you're still the same person, still functioning normally, still moving forward, but internally you're dealing with confusion, frustration, and self-doubt that no one else can see. There's no recognition for the effort you're putting in, no validation for the time you're investing, and no guarantee that it will lead anywhere. And that's when the most difficult question begins to form, not loudly, but persistently. It's not about the process anymore, it's about you. You start wondering whether you're capable of doing this at all, whether you're trying to step into something that simply isn't meant for you. It's a quiet, uncomfortable thought, but it stays with you, repeating itself in the background of every attempt. And this is the moment where most people don't fail loudly. They just stop trying. They return to what feels familiar, what feels safe, what feels understandable. Because staying in confusion is exhausting and walking away from it feels like relief. And this is where most people quietly give up. By the time you reach this point, it doesn't feel like a sudden collapse. It feels like a slow accumulation of everything that hasn't worked. The effort, the confusion, the lack of results, and the constant mental strain all come together in a way that makes continuing feel heavier than stopping. You're not reacting emotionally. In fact, this is the most logical quitting has ever felt. You begin to think about what life would look like if you just let this go. You imagine closing all the tabs, deleting the notes, stopping the late-night attempts to understand something that refuses to become clear. You picture yourself returning fully to your previous routine where things made sense, where effort had predictable outcomes, where you didn't have to question every step you took. There's a certain peace in that image. Not excitement, not growth, but peace. The kind that comes from certainty, from knowing what to expect, from removing the pressure of trying something that might not work. And for a moment, that peace feels like the right choice, because what you're doing now doesn't feel stable, doesn't feel clear, and definitely doesn't feel guaranteed. But as you sit with that idea, something doesn't settle the way you expect it to. That version of peace feels incomplete, almost like it requires you to ignore something you've already discovered. Because the truth is, you can't go back to the same mindset you had before. You've already seen enough to know that there's another way, even if you don't fully understand it yet. That's where the tension becomes real. It's no longer just about success or failure, it's about identity. Quitting wouldn't just mean stopping the process, it would mean choosing to stay within a version of yourself that you've already started to outgrow. And that realization is what makes the decision difficult. You stand in that space between continuing and stopping, and neither option feels completely right. Continuing feels uncertain and exhausting, but stopping feels limiting in a way you can't ignore. It's not fear that keeps you from quitting, it's awareness. The awareness that even if you go back, something inside you will remain unsettled, still questioning, still searching for answers. And that's what makes this moment so important, because it's not about motivation or discipline anymore. It's about whether you're willing to sit with uncertainty long enough to figure it out. Most people choose certainty, even if it limits them, because it feels safer. But something about that choice doesn't sit right with you anymore, because quitting would remove the pressure, but it wouldn't remove the question. It doesn't arrive the way you imagined it would. There's no dramatic moment, no build-up, no sense of this is it. It just appears quietly, almost casually, like it wasn't trying to impress you. Maybe it's a notification, maybe it's a small balance update, maybe it's a number that looks so insignificant that a few months ago you wouldn't have even noticed it, but this time you do. You stop. You look at it again, and then something shifts. Because this isn't money from your job. It didn't come from a fixed schedule or from someone deciding what your time is worth. It came from something you did outside the system you've always known. And that difference, no matter how small the amount is, changes how it feels. It's not about the value, it's about the source. You sit with it longer than you expected to. Not celebrating, not reacting loudly, just observing it, trying to fully understand what it means. Because for the first time, there's proof. Not theory, not possibility, not something you saw someone else do. This is yours, and that's when the realization becomes unavoidable. It works. Not perfectly, not consistently, not at scale, but it works. And that single shift from believing something might be possible to knowing that it is rewires something deep inside you. It's subtle, but it's permanent, because once you've seen evidence, you can't go back to pure doubt. Even if you question the process again, even if you struggle again, that moment stays with you. You created something from nothing. Without permission, without guarantees, without structure. And that realization doesn't just affect how you see money, it changes how you see control. Because now the system you once depended on doesn't feel absolute anymore. It feels optional. And that's a dangerous feeling, because once you know you can create even a small amount on your own, the idea of relying entirely on something external starts to feel less secure, not more. And suddenly, everything changes. After that first result, something inside you locks in. Not loudly, not in a way others would notice, but internally, there's a shift that's hard to explain. The same curiosity that once felt uncertain now turns into focus. You're no longer just exploring. You're trying to understand deeply. Every small success feels like a clue, and every failure feels like something that needs to be decoded, not avoided. You start thinking about it more than you planned to, not in a chaotic way, but in a structured, almost constant way. Ideas follow you throughout the day, you analyze things differently, you notice patterns where you didn't before. What used to be background noise now feels like information. Your attention changes, time changes, you begin to treat hours differently, not as something to pass, but as something to allocate. You catch yourself thinking, this could be used better, even in moments that used to feel normal. And without forcing it, your behavior starts to adjust to match that thinking. You double down. You learn faster, not because you're trying harder, but because now it matters. You're no longer chasing an idea. You're building something that has already shown you it can exist. And that makes the process feel more real, more urgent, more personal. At the same time, something else happens quietly. Going back starts to feel impossible, not because you physically can't, but because mentally you've crossed a line. The old way of thinking, waiting, depending, staying within limits, no longer fits the version of you that has already experienced something different. You begin to see the gap more clearly now between people who consume and people who create, between people who wait and people who build. And slowly, without announcing it, you move from one side to the other. It doesn't feel like a big transition. It feels like a series of small decisions that stack over time. But the identity shift is real. You're not just someone who works anymore. You're someone who builds. And now, going back feels impossible. From the outside, this is the part people misunderstand the most. Because when they hear $10,000, they imagine a moment, a breakthrough, a sudden jump, something dramatic that changes everything instantly. But the reality feels very different when you're inside it. It builds slowly, sometimes so slowly that you question if it's building at all. You have days where things work, where numbers move, where progress feels visible, and then you have days, sometimes weeks, where nothing happens, where it feels like you're back at the beginning, even though you know you're not. It's not linear, it's uneven, messy. You make progress, then lose some of it. You gain clarity, then face new confusion. You feel confident, then question everything again, and through all of it, you keep going, not because it's easy, but because stopping doesn't make sense anymore. That's what changes in this phase. You stop looking for instant results, you start looking for patterns. You begin to understand that this isn't about one action working perfectly, it's about consistency stacking over time. Small wins that don't feel significant in the moment, but add up in ways you only notice later. You adjust your expectations, not by lowering them, but by refining them. You stop expecting immediate outcomes and start respecting the process itself. You realize that building something meaningful doesn't feel exciting most of the time. It feels repetitive, focused, and sometimes even boring. But within that repetition, something is growing. You check your progress one day without expecting anything significant, almost out of routine rather than excitement, and that's when something feels different. The number in front of you doesn't immediately register because your mind is still used to thinking in smaller increments, in small wins and minor progress. But as you look at it again, more carefully this time, you begin to understand what you're seeing. It's not one big moment, not one lucky outcome, but the accumulation of everything you've been doing quietly over time. When it finally happens, it doesn't feel like a moment you've been waiting for your whole life. There's no rush of emotion, no overwhelming sense of victory, just a quiet pause as you look at the number and try to process what it actually means. For so long it was a goal, something distant and almost symbolic, but now that it's in front of you, it feels surprisingly normal. You expected it to change something instantly to unlock a new feeling, but instead, it feels like a continuation rather than a conclusion. And that's when it becomes clear that the number itself was never the real reward. It was everything that led up to it. The patience, the confusion, the discipline, the identity shift. All of it mattered more than the milestone. And that's when the real realization begins. By the time you reach that number, you're not the same person who started chasing it. The way you think about money, time, and effort has changed in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. You no longer see money as something that arrives. You see it as something that can be built, shaped, and expanded. Your decisions reflect that shift. You become more intentional, more aware, and more selective about how you use your time. What once felt uncertain now feels navigable, even if it's still unpredictable. But with that shift comes something unexpected. You don't fit as easily into the same spaces anymore, not because anything around you has changed, but because you have. The version of you that once accepted limitations without question has been replaced by someone who sees possibilities everywhere, and that creates a subtle but real disconnect. But this new version of you just doesn't fit everywhere anymore. That disconnect becomes more noticeable over time, especially when you return to the same environments that once felt completely natural. Conversations start to feel different, not because they've changed, but because your perspective has. Topics that once held your attention now feel repetitive, and ideas that excite you don't always translate in the same way to others. You still care, you still listen, but there's a quiet awareness that you're no longer operating from the same mindset. It's not about being better or worse, just different. Growth has a way of creating distance, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. You begin to realize that evolving doesn't just add something to your life. It also separates you from parts of your past that no longer align with who you're becoming. And while that growth is necessary, it comes with a subtle loneliness that no one really prepares you for, and no one prepares you for this part. In the end, the number itself fades in importance compared to what it represents. That first $10,000 isn't just money, it's proof that you're no longer dependent on the system you once believed was your only option. It's evidence that you can create, not just receive, and that realization reshapes how you see your future. You begin to understand that this was never about reaching a specific amount, but about gaining control over how you earn, how you think, and how you move forward. Looking back, the journey feels less like a